Okay, so the next question, why do I need to worry about grading near my house?
Well, soil is the number one cause of structural problems in Colorado. And a lot of places in the state have expansive soils. And the way those soils work is that they react to changes in moisture content. And so let's say that the soil next to the foundation right after they build the house is very dry. And let's say there's poor grading next to the foundation, or there's some downspouts that drain right next to the foundation. Um, that new water from snow or heavy rain or constant dribbling from the downspout can cause that expansive soil to react and swell. And when it swells, it can heave the foundation and cause structural problems. So the key to stability is good grading and drainage away from the foundation, at least 5 feet.
And that then comes into our next question, why gutters and downspouts are important to drain that away.
Well, it's the same reason. When they build a house, they dig a big hole and they excavate that hole 5 feet, generally more on each side, so that when they form the foundation, the guys can jump in the hole and work on it. And so that width, that 5 foot width around the foundation is called the backfill zone. And so after they pour the foundation and it cures and then they put in the first floor, they will backfill the hole. And usually that backfill is not compacted very well,
Sure.
or certainly not as compact as the rest of the yard.
Yeah.
So that zone tends to attract and hold moisture.
Okay.
And so if you have a downspout that drains into that backfill zone, and you have expansive soils, that can cause the soils to swell and heave, and it actually bonds to the foundation wall, and it can pick the house up out of the ground
Oh,
and
wow.
cause foundation damage.
Wow, that's not good. Okay. Um, Oftentimes when I'm walking around with clients in the basement and the basement has cement walls, they're not finished or anything. Sometimes we'll see little teeny tiny cracks. Sometimes we'll see really huge cracks that like go the whole length of the wall or width of the wall. Sometimes they're very narrow. Sometimes they're very wide. The wide ones always scare me. But do I need to worry about, in general, do I need to worry about cracks in the basement wall?
Well, it's funny you ask that because that's the most common question I get asked in what I do. And, is that a good crack or a bad crack, right? And it seems like a lot of people, mostly home inspectors, key in on horizontal cracks. Oh, you have a horizontal crack. That's bad, right? But for me, that's always the wrong question. Is that a good crack or a bad crack? The right question, and my answer to that is always the same, and that it's the wrong question.
Sure.
So the right question is a two-part question. Um, what's the cause and what's the consequence,
Okay.
right? So the cause is easy to speculate on. It's either going to be vertical movement or lateral movement or both that cause the crack. But the important part is what's the consequence, right? So in order to answer that, you have to kind of know from a structural perspective what the foundation is intended to do. And generally two things. One is to support the weight on the foundation vertically, and two is to resist the pressure on the walls from the soil laterally.
Okay.
And so if that cracked foundation wall is doing that in a safe, stable, cracked manner, then it's not a structural issue.
Okay.
It's it could be another issue, like maybe there's groundwater seeping in, or maybe there's termites infesting, or maybe radon gas is coming in, but it's not a structural issue.
Okay.
And so generally, what I look for when I go to look at a foundation crack is the wall bowing inward? And generally, if it's bowing inward more greater than an inch and a half, then that should be looked at. I also look and see if the wall is leaning in vertically. And if it's out of plumb like that, more than 3 inches, it should be looked at. Otherwise, it's probably not a structural issue.
Okay.
Now, the only exception to that is that if it's a newer home, like if it's a home less than 10 years old, um, it hasn't been in service long enough to know whether it's active or not. So that could just be the beginning of a problem for a newer home. So, any kind of crack in a newer home less than 10 years old, you probably want to get looked at anyway, just to make sure that it's not something active.
That makes sense. And I suppose, it depends on each individual case, so to speak.
Yep.
So
And there's lots of variables with each case.
yeah, that's really great information though, because I know a lot of times, especially with older homes, you're going to see a little bit of settling. But if the walls are not bowing in, then it sounds like it's probably the foundation, the structure is doing its job.
Yeah, and sometimes with older homes, you have active problems because people put new gutters and downspouts on, and now there's a new downspout that's dumping water right next to the foundation that it didn't do before. Or maybe they did some landscaping next to the foundation where now it's not draining away like it used to. So new water sources cause the soil to react. And a lot of times when you have flat grading next to the foundation, you can also get something called frost heave, where the backfill zone gets saturated, like maybe in the fall. And then winter arrives and the backfill zone freezes.
Oh, wow.
That frozen soil expands and pushes on the wall. So it's usually recent changes on older homes that can cause active foundation problems.
Okay, that makes sense. And that just speaks to why you want to have those downspout extenders. So,
And I should mention one other thing with those.
Yeah.
Underground downspouts don't work well in Colorado.
Really?
Yep. Even if they're done right, where they go into the ground and they come out somewhere, and let's say they even have a rodent screen on the end of the pipe to keep rabbits out. The reason underground downspouts fail in Colorado mostly is when it snows, snow drifts on the end of the pipe and sits there. And the next day it's like 50 degrees, right? So all the snow on the roof melts and it fills up the system and it can't drain out because the snow's sitting on the end of the pipe. And that night it's usually still cold,
and it freezes.
And it'll cause that water in the pipe to freeze and either break or crack the pipe. And then you have a water source next to the foundation that you don't even know about.
Wow.
And then all of a sudden your foundation's moving.
I didn't even think about that. That's good. Okay.
Yep.
Well, thank you for sharing that.